Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Welcome, everyone, to the Living Out Loud podcast with your host, Jess Phillips, and our second episode with guest Laurie Poole, psychotherapist from Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Laurie.
Thanks, Jess. From Dallas, Texas. It sounds so far away from Montreal.
It really does. It really
That's
does.
because it is.
Yeah, it is. But also sounds very cool. And you really kind of fit the Dallas, Texas, model. I love it.
Really with the blonde hair.
I love
Is that it? Yeah. I'm going in a box being blonde, Jess. There's going to be no gray for me. I'll tell you that right now.
Good for you, sister. I will be the same. I can assure you that.
Yeah. Blonde all the way.
Laurie, thank you so much for agreeing to be here and fitting me in your super busy schedule. This is so fun. So many years later, why don't you tell listeners where you and I first met?
Yes. Well, Jess, yes, as we were going down the road of nostalgia a couple of days ago, the first time or the period of time where I met you was in the wading pool of Beacon Hill Swim Club, circa 1989 maybe, about 1989 I would say. And your mom, who is so gorgeous, was sitting looking just lovely and calm and by the wading pool, and you were there on a towel playing and so calm and perfect. And I was chasing my 2-year-old around the wading pool, pulling her out from underneath the water, and I thought, God, Maggie gets to sit and I'm chasing this kid all over the pool. Anyway, that's how far back we go.
She's going to love that story because that was a very different story by the time I hit 13 years old. I'll tell you that. There was no calm sitting by the pool anymore. That's too funny. That's too funny. So we go back a very long time,
That's right. That's really right. Yeah.
And all these years that have passed, I have been able to kind of keep up with you, keep in contact through social media and Facebook,
That's right.
And I've always been really fascinated by your path to becoming a psychotherapist. So Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing what you do?
Sure. Well, this is really a third act career for me. So I have lived in Dallas now for over 15 years, which is really hard to believe. But when I moved down here, Southern Methodist University was just opening up its Master's of Science in Counseling program. And I had wanted to go back to graduate school for a long time, but the timing was never right, or you couldn't do it part-time. And I don't know, there was always a reason why I couldn't do it. And I had my eyes set on McGill. When I moved down here though, SMU was opening up the program and I could do it part-time, and I worked remotely, which was great because it allowed me to go back and forth between Montreal and Dallas. And it also allowed me to sort of combine my graduate work. So I actually went back to grad school at 50. And once you've done your master's program, then you have to do 3,000 postgraduate hours excuse me, that was my phone going off because this is real life, right? I apologize.
Okay.
So then you have to do 3,000 hours of postgraduate supervised hours in order to be fully licensed. So it took me almost 10 years to get all of that under my belt.
Wow.
And while I was doing my internship at UT, which is the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, I really fell in love with couples therapy and attachment theory, and it opened up a whole new world for me that even when I graduated, I wasn't entirely sure what niche I wanted to develop or carve out for myself. But working with couples and families really became a passion, and things just kind of, flowed from there.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned that there really is never going to be a perfect time, and I
There isn't.
No, I share that a lot with clients, even myself included. I kept waiting for certain projects. Oh, I'll study some more, or I'll take some more courses, or I'll practice some more. And sometimes you just got to rip the Band-Aid off, and it's just about action at that point. You just got to jump in.
You just have to jump in, and I think you do make time for the things that that are important to you. And for me, I had started off. I worked at John Abbott for years and years. I was there for 15 years, and I started off as a receptionist because when I graduated from the Faculty of Education, there were no teaching jobs. And then I became an academic advisor at 23. I don't know how anybody believed anything I told them, but it was sort of the entree into like that counseling, umbrella. Plus, I'd been a peer counselor when I was a student at Abbott. I was a peer counselor at Beaconsfield High. You can tell I'm a West Island girl. Totally. And and so going to graduate school at 50 was like going full circle in a lot of ways, because from all of that, I then went into marketing, communications, events, and a whole other genre. But I guess communication has always been sort of the baseline of what I've been attracted to. So it wasn't a career that I specifically planned, but when I look back on it now, I think, wow, it's so interesting how life just takes you in a direction, and it can often come full circle, Definitely. And here I am at a time where many of my peers are retiring, and I can't even imagine it. I mean, I just love what I do. Nobody has to tell me when it's time to hang up the shingle. And I guess I'll just stop when I can't remember clients' names anymore. I love that. What I love about this profession is that life experience is so important in terms of how you relate to your clients. And the other piece of it also is that there is a developmental aspect of becoming a therapist. That self of the therapist, your own experiences that you bring into the room, because you're really a conduit of change and healing for a lot of people. So you have to work out your own stuff, because it's, you bring yourself into the room as an instrument. And so I think when you have a lot of life experience, any kind of life experience that has taken you in a certain direction, or things that you've had to work through, all of that shows up, when you're working with clients. So it's been really rewarding. I love what I do.
I'm so happy for you. And I'm so happy that you're here and you're thriving. There's no slowing you down. I have so many questions for you. You just mentioned something so crucial to me. You mentioned, that gift of communication. And it's very true. Anybody that I know in this field, therapy, self-development, anybody that I follow on YouTube or all these accounts are experts at communicating. And if there's one thing that I remember about you, even back when I was a child, is just your personality. Your personality came into the room before you did. It was always lively and energetic and funny and just really authentic. Yeah,
well,
really authentic. Yeah, of course.
I think that even in therapy, there has to be room for you to show up with your own personality. Back when I was in school, we'd watch these videos of middle-aged men going, with European accents going, so what is the problem? And I thought, oh, I can't relate to that. That's not me. I like to have fun in therapy. I like to be able to laugh, find humor in sometimes the darkest places, because people are coming in with a lot of stuff. And so I'm very judicious about how I employ humor as a tool, but it can also be a way to break the ice and to release a little bit of tension, and to also validate and reassure that no matter where you are, it doesn't mean you're going to stay stuck there. There's lots of possibilities. So
totally. And what a beautiful balance is to, be able to create that space for someone, that safe space, but also show up warm, empathetic, and with a little bit of humor at the same time. Just, it does break that ice, and it's a great skill to have.
I don't think I could be entirely serious like for the whole day. I would lose it.
You and me both.
Yeah.
You and me.
No, I need more than one session of therapy a week for myself.
So without getting into too much detail, can you give listeners an idea of, how you ended up in Dallas, Texas. So you mentioned you were living in Montreal, Quebec, and you changed careers and now you're in Dallas. What did that look like for you?
Well, I remarried in 1999, and my husband is American. He's actually from Poughkeepsie, New York, and we met in Dallas, and he always wanted to go back there. So he had a terrific job offer, which he couldn't turn down. So he left. He returned. We got married. He came up to Montreal for 5 years, went back to Dallas for this job opportunity, but it took me almost 2 years to get my green card.
Mm.
So I went back and forth, and we did the long distance thing again. So that's how I ended up in Dallas. Was I followed Scott, um, and it just so happened that SMU's program was opening up. So it was really divine timing. It was perfect.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. And so I have a question only because it's where my personal experience led me into the field of addiction therapy and coaching. So I know that your passion is couples therapy, divorce, attachment theory. Does any of your personal experience in relationship, did that have anything to do with you becoming a psychotherapist or you specializing in couples counseling?
When I did my master's degree and I read about family systems and couples, I thought to myself, oh my God, I feel like I'm reading my life in the pages of this textbook. It was like I had done all the laboratory work before I got to the theory.
Yeah.
So it really resonated with me. And I think, yes, I had been through a lot before I went into my program. I had been divorced, remarried. I have two children who are now, in their 30s. But there was a lot of things. I had lost my dad suddenly, my brother, my sister-in-law in a short period of time. There were just a lot of life experiences that I had, which I think have really served me in terms of just having sensitivity, empathy, understanding. While my experience may not be what my client's experience is, I can sit in the room and be right in the soup with them and not be uncomfortable with the grief, the tears, the anxiety. I had suffered badly with anxiety throughout a lot of my life, and I think the first time I went into therapy, I was about 27, and I had a wonderful therapist who I saw for 5 years, and that was life changing for me. So I think all of those experiences really cultivated into the direction that I took. It was almost as though my sole curriculum, if you like, was to have all of these experiences to prep me for a different career path when I turned 50.
Yeah.
To get the textbook and the theory behind me, and even then, the idea of specializing in couples therapy wasn't something that really landed on me till I was doing my 3,000 hours.
Okay.
And so, you continue to evolve. It's a developmental process when you become a therapist, because you evolve over time in that role as well.
I love that idea of kind of your own personal challenges or pain, if you will, really helped fuel your career. And I couldn't agree more. I have so many people ask me the question, hey, Jess, how come you help people with food addiction or drug addiction or alcoholism? Like, well, how much time do you have? Sit down, grab a cup of coffee.
Yes, it's so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so true. I think that probably the personal experience I call upon the most when I'm working with couples who are about to divorce or feel as though they're headed in that direction is my own experience in divorce, which, listen, there's no winning in that situation. It is heartbreaking and very, very stressful and sad. There's a tremendous amount of grief when a couple divorces. I was very lucky, though. I think over time, I developed a really strong, wonderful friendship with my ex-husband. And the children benefited from that. We celebrated holidays together, even after I remarried. I gave a eulogy at his funeral. He passed away 5 years ago. And I asked to go last because I said the ex-wife should have the last word.
Now that's a
You
Laurie thing
did.
to say.
But I miss him terribly, but I feel so blessed, Jess, that we had that kind of a friendship,
Mm,
because we stayed very connected.
mm,
And, by the time he died, we had already been divorced 20 years. So I share that story with people as a message of hope, that divorce doesn't have to always land you in this horrific place where children are used as pawns
yeah.
and, continued hurt. I mean, that takes time. It didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. But,
Yeah.
like I said earlier, you don't have to stay stuck.
Yeah.
It takes time to recover from that kind of experience. But I offer my experience as a message of hope, really, more than anything.
What do you think the fundamental difference between, let's say, an uglier divorce versus a divorce that ends up with the two parties becoming friends? What are the biggest differences you see in those two paths?
Oh, that's such a great question. I don't know that I have the answer to that one. I think, when this is just a personal bias, when lawyers start to get involved,
Mm,
then it becomes more about winning as opposed to what is really the best for the kids.
mm,
How can we work together to ensure that the children have as much stability as possible? And they will take their cues from us. So if we can find a way to be civil and get along and come together in terms of what's best for the children, then they're going to be better off. And I think with divorce, depending on what's led to the divorce, if there's been infidelity, if there's been another betrayal of some kind, it really depends on what brought them to the divorce table to begin with.
yeah. Yeah.
Because often whatever that is has been going on for a while,
Definitely.
and they haven't sought out. I mean, sometimes I get couples who come in and I think, wow, I really don't know how this is going to go. And I never tell a couple, I don't think you should stay together unless there's, domestic violence. That's a whole other ball of wax, but it's not my job to tell a couple whether or not they should stay together.
Right.
It's more about, do you understand what's going on right now? What is this dance that you've been going at for such a long time? Where are the attachment injuries? What happened? And what happens for you when? Because what happens within flows between the partners.
Yeah.
And I think typically what you see is partners pointing at each other, playing find the bad guy or the blame game.
Mm.
And they're not really looking at, okay, what happens for me when? When I feel this way, then I do that. How do they contribute to this relationship dance that they have that's evolved between them over time?
I love that. What happens to me when? That's a
Mm.
very rational thought to have when you're in a heated emotional argument or debate between two people. What about the couple that stays together that perhaps would have been better off splitting years back? What happens to that type of energy when two people stay together that shouldn't be together?
I think then at that time, first of all, I don't particularly subscribe to the idea that a couple should stay together for the sake of the children.
Mm,
Because then I'm asking myself, well, what are you modeling for your children?
yeah.
Are your head and your heart in the same place? And if they're not, then how are you leading what I would call an authentic life? You can't be.
Yeah.
And if you think that children don't see through that, you are very mistaken. Children know way more than parents think they do.
Yeah.
And even if they don't always understand what's going on, they feel it.
Yeah.
So, when I worked at the Family Studies Center, parents would bring kids in, and we never saw children alone. The children had to be seen as within the family context, within that family system. So parents would say, "Oh, this kid's acting up. He or she is so impossible. This is what's happening," and that child is referred to as the IP or identified patient. But when you pull back and you look at the family system, often what you see is there was stuff going on between mom and dad, and kid was acting out in reaction to what was happening with mom and dad. And then I would end up seeing the parents for couples therapy, but when they came in, it was the child that was the problem.
Interesting.
Because, and we used to say, well, you know what? This kid did his job or her job. They brought them into therapy, and that's where mom and dad needed to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that they would bring the child into therapy saying X, Y, and Z has behavioral problems, and expect you to work on the child when it's really the parents' relationship that's kind of projecting.
Well, I think, well, let's say we have a 10-year-old child who's acting out, then we would bring the whole family in.
Right.
And what's interesting is when you have the whole family, then you have a much greater understanding of the system in which the family operates. So, and this is, of course, also where attachment comes into it. So you look at what kind of family of origin experience have the parents had? Did they have a parent who was an alcoholic? Did they have a dad who traveled all the time? How did parents show affection with one another? Were they allowed to express how they felt, or was there an unwritten rule that emotions are not expressed and they're not talked about either? Were there family secrets? Like families are fascinating, and patterns get handed down from one generation to another. So looking at the family of origin that both parents have had helps to inform the way they show up as parents with their own children. Right? So you're looking at the whole family system of what happens between mom and dad. What is the role children play within the family? Maybe someone's a shit disturber. Someone else is a peacekeeper. Someone else is the clown. Someone is the family counselor, right? Kids can play different roles in the family. Some children end up being what is called parentified. They end up taking emotional care of their parents in order to find or to feel the kind of love they're looking for from their parent. So if you have a parent that's not emotionally available or tuned into a child, that can result in that kid acting out or not doing well at school or fighting with the other siblings. Like there can be a lot of things, but when you look at children, you've got to look at the family system because that child is part of that system. So to treat them in isolation, I think, is not getting the whole story. And if we can get parents talking to each other and reducing the tension in the household if there's something going on in their relationship, I think that can really be beneficial for all the children in the family. And there's an expression, nobody grows up in the same family. So if I'm the identified patient in the so-called troubled child that needs help, the other two kids in the family, if we're talking about 3 children, for example, the other 2 children may have a very different experience than the one who's always getting in trouble or being called out. So that's the kind of systemic thinking that I personally feel is really, really important.
Wow, I love it. And there's so many layers to what you just talked about.
Yeah.
I have this certain idea that I'm very grateful to be kind of experiencing and growing up in this generation where therapy and attachment injury and self-help is readily available and talked about. But when I look back at previous generations, what happens when a couple or parents just maybe don't believe in therapy, or they say, oh, that's just the, emotional mumbo jumbo, and they really just kind of discredit it? What would you do with a family like that?
I think a family like that probably wouldn't come in to see me.
That's a good point.
Because if they think, but you can have a couple, for example, where one partner really wants to do the therapy and the other one is there just because their partner said, look, if we don't come to therapy, I'm out of here. Because I can't keep doing this. And that's hard. But I think you just meet the client where they're at. You say, listen, I understand. And I hear that more from men than I do women. Because I think there is a perception that if you come to therapy, there must be something wrong with you. You're broken. Well, that's just horseshit. Everybody can benefit from therapy. And it's not because you're broken. It's what's working for you. What works really well. I mean, therapy doesn't have to be all about the problem.
Mm.
I like to look at, well, what's working? Let's celebrate that, because it can't be bad all the time. It's just that when things aren't working, we tend to focus on that, and often we ruminate over it, and we hold those feelings, and we hold the hurt and the pain, but we're not necessarily expressing it in a way that our partner can hear and receive and respond to. I describe it as, what couples often see in each other is what's above the surface of the water. So they see the reactivity to the emotion that they're feeling, but they're not necessarily expressing what they feel. So when someone comes in and they're skeptical, I just kind of meet them where they're at, and I normalize that, and I say, I totally get it, and let's just see where we go. No pressure. I'm not here to sell you on something.
Yeah.
And if at the very least you can hold space for your partner to express how he or she feels, then that's a big part of being here, and we'll just take our time.
I love that. I love the idea of celebrating instead of focusing all the time on what's going wrong.
Yeah.
I just finished working with a coach who I interviewed on episode 1. And each week that we would meet, he would say, okay, Jess, how was your week? And I'd be like, blah, 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 blah. And I'd start going, and he's like, no, we're going to start with what went well this week. And it was so interesting because automatically my mind would want to tell him what didn't go well. Like I really wanted to tell him what didn't go well. And I had to reprogram myself to focus on the positives first and really stay and hold space with that, rather than the big story that came along with what wasn't going so well for me. So I love that.
Well, I think too, that we can get very caught up in content. I had, and it's not unusual for couples to come in and they're in front of a third party, and one partner will say something and the other one will go, no, that's not the way it happened. It was this, and that. And then they start debating and litigating whose version of the story is the correct one. And that's when I say, okay, let's just take a deep breath here. All is true. Each one of you has a different perspective, a different reality, and there's room for both to coexist. And so I'm less interested in who did what, when, and where right now, as I am looking at what are the emotions that are driving this dance that the two of you are getting into. And I mean, you can't really get there overnight. That takes work. But what you find, or what I have found over the years, is that people can talk a lot, but they're not really saying, man, I miss you so much. I'm feeling this distance between the two of us, and I just don't know how to reach for you. I don't know how to access you. Most people don't talk to each other that way, number one.
Definitely not.
But understanding and being able to help clients with just the words and the verbiage to describe how they feel and to share with their partner how they feel. So that phrase that I used earlier in our conversation about what happens for me when, that's something we explore after the escalation or after the reactivity, where couples learn that they can have a rewind, where they can come back to their partner and say, hey, you know what? I flew off the handle. I was so aggravated. And here's what was going on for me. And I just, I want to apologize because I was in this zone and it had nothing to do with you. For example, I had a couple yesterday. They were talking about their daughter going off to college and how much it would cost and so on. And he was running numbers. Dad was running numbers the whole time. And his wife would say something and he would just pick that up and he would start running the numbers again. And I said, whoa, help me understand what's going on right now. And he said, I'm doing the protest polka. And I said, okay, perfect. Tell me more about what's happening, because I'm feeling like there's a lot of panic going on right now as you're running all these numbers. And he said, yes, there is. I'm so panicked that I won't be able to provide what it is she wants. All right. So if we were just looking at the top of the water, at the surface of the water, we'd see a guy who was like running numbers and saying, no, 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 we can't do this. It's too much. And literally protesting. And the minute he said, I'm doing the protest polka, his wife said, now I understand. And he was able to share with her how he felt. He said, and the fear that he has, which he couldn't access before until he figured out what was going on for him.
Wow.
Yeah, it was those moments in couples therapy, like they're worth $1 million.
Yeah.
And she got all teary.
Yeah, when you were talking, when you were offering that example of, I feel very far from you right now, I miss you, and I don't know, I even felt so soothed. I was like, if somebody spoke to me that way, I would be like, oh my God, sit down, let's have an open conversation. But interestingly, the ego takes over and it's like, what's wrong? Why are you in a bad mood? Oh my God, you're doing this again. And it's just this ego battle that I've experienced personally, and I've witnessed time and time again.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how people react. That's a reactive way of approaching it, because there's something happening for you. There's something behind. What's going on with you right now? What's happening? Don't tell me we're doing this again. Oh my God, here we go. Yeah. Right? That is the anticipation of what feels like a familiar dance.
Yes.
So it's like you hear the music and you start stepping the steps, and the other person hasn't said a word.
Yeah.
Right? And because when you have had those patterns repeated in a relationship, you just go there. The minute you anticipate something, you're emotionally braced, your physiology changes, your body language changes, and you're like, okay, here we go. Because you're starting to feel the way you feel when the two of you get into that polka or that waltz or the cha-cha, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's a dance.
Yeah.
And it creates this feedback loop, Jess. So if you look at an infinity symbol on its side, you have, so in the example you gave, it's like you saw something. It could be a tone, body language, something that triggers you to think, oh my God, here we go. Mm-hmm. And so when you see that body language here, then you have an emotion that responds to the body language you've seen. It could be fear, anticipation, this is going to be uncomfortable, uncertainty, I don't know what's going to happen. And then your reaction to the emotion you're feeling down here is, what's wrong? What's happening? Etc. Right? That's a reaction to this uncertainty and this perhaps worry, fear, anxiety that you experience down here at the bottom of the infinity loop. And then your reaction hits your partner a certain way. They have a feeling, and then they react to that. So the reaction might be, there's nothing wrong with me. But what they heard was, oh, there's no room for me to say, I'm having a really crappy day today, and I don't know why.
Wow.
See, so when you think about that feedback loop, right? And so the feedback loop, a lot of couples just get stuck. And it's not only couples, it's parents and children. Yeah. You will do as I say. I'm the parent. This, and that just deteriorates. It can be with coworkers. Yeah. It's a feedback loop that I think when you frame it in the context of the feedback loop and the dance that then gets churned, it makes it easier for couples to understand where the triggers come from, their emotional reaction, the need to soothe, like I'm coming to you. And that's the attachment piece. If I come to you when I'm feeling vulnerable, can I be reassured that you've got my back, that you offer me comfort and reassurance when I need it? Just like little kids, we need that as adults too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was so perfectly explained, especially with the infinity symbol. As you were framing it, I viewed myself, I was like, oh, there I go. And then the panic sets in, and then the
Yeah.
reaction starts, and you nailed it. It doesn't have to be in a romantic relationship. It's been with bosses, coworkers, friends, Starbucks employees, like you name it, the reaction can come. And I'm so happy that you used the word trigger, because I think spending so long in the field of addiction recovery and working in multiple treatment centers in the private and public sectors, you hear the word trigger often. I'm triggered. This triggers me. But I've never been taken a step further, you know, in your explanation of the trigger. It's not just, oh, you're triggered and you move on with your day. There is a root cause to that trigger. And I think it's very important that we find out where those triggers are coming from.
Absolutely. And what I have witnessed over the years is that there can be attachment wounds from childhood, adolescence. Adolescence is that's a really important period of developmental tasks. And often people have their first romantic relationships. And that can leave a blueprint that gets carried into adulthood. And then you have, relationships in your early 20s, and you may get married in your 20s, or you may, which is certainly more the trend these days, in contrast to when I first got married, 46 years ago, people were getting younger, or they were living together, which was very still controversial. And where was I going with all of this? Those kinds of early experiences show up in current relationships. So if I had a terrible breakup in my early 20s, for example, and it was my first serious romance, and I had a tough breakup where there was infidelity or I felt just betrayed, boy, I'm going to be pretty cautious in my next relationship, probably. And it may be in the next relationship that I start to work out some of the stuff that happened when I felt betrayed and a really difficult breakup. So attachment wounds and that experience, I think, happens throughout the lifespan. But our earliest experiences are in early childhood, where that blueprint gets set. When we think about just think about, for your listeners, Jess, who was the person in your life when you were a little kid? Was there an adult that you would seek out when you were looking for comfort, reassurance? Maybe you were upset about something, or there was just something about that adult that always made you feel safe and unconditionally loved. That's a really positive, strong attachment. That gets, that's a healthy, secure introduction to attachment. When I'm distressed, will someone come, and will someone respond to me? Will they give me what I need? Do I feel unconditionally loved? And many children don't have that experience. They may not get it from their parents, but there could be a grandparent, there could be an aunt, there could be someone who they just always felt really good to be around. But it starts really young, and then that can influence the way we show up in relationships later in life, as can, past relationships, romantic ones.
Yeah. You mentioned the word secure. So in that example that you just gave, so if the child did receive that kind of unconditional positive regard, would that equate a secure adult growing up?
I think it certainly sets a child off in the right direction. I don't think it's the only experience that contributes to secure attachment as an adult. So what's adult attachment? It's much like a child. We are wired for connection. And what I'm sharing isn't anything new. Anybody who's interested in reading more about this, I strongly recommend Sue Johnson's book called Hold Me Tight. Sue Johnson developed the emotionally focused therapy taught at the University of Ottawa for years and years and years, and is now out west. But she really put this all together beautifully in a great package of understanding about adult attachment, because we are wired for connection. We do want to feel like we matter and that we're important to someone else. And what she noticed and this has been studied, there have been tons of studies done on emotionally focused emotionally focused therapy and attachment. The most common that we see in adults is what I would call anxious attachment. So that's a partner who is, what's the matter? What's happening? I need to talk about this right now. I feel you pulling away from me. And they start to feel all kinds of anxiety. But the anxiety, me too, the anxiety might present as lots of questions, irritability, criticism, literally following a partner from one room to the other until the conversation is had. Because at the root of it all is, I want to know if we're okay. And I want to sort this out right now, because until I know we're okay, I can't settle. And the other kind of pattern that we see in adults is more avoidant. I don't want to talk about this right now because this isn't going to go well. And I'm overwhelmed and I need time to process things. And I'm just going to go over in this corner. I'm going to shut down, or I'm not going to engage, or I'm going to leave the building. And because I got to get away, this is making me very anxious. This pursuit is making me very, very anxious. And it's a protective move because the person doesn't want to make things worse. But the pursuit creates a lot of anxiety. So you have, in many ways, and often in couples, you see someone who's a pursuer and someone who avoids. And so it creates a perfect storm, because the more the withdrawer pulls away, the more anxious the pursuer comes. And then we get into hard pursuit, and, things can just blow up. So we look at, what is it? Is there something about the house in which they grew up where the message was, keep your head down? Was there a lot of chaos and volatility, which meant that the way to be safe was to avoid, to go to your room, to not talk to anyone? There are childhood strategies that adults bring into a relationship that may not serve them so well, but worked really well when they were kids. Like, they're very adaptive, as kids. So I just reframe it as, listen, you knew what you needed to do to feel safe. It was all about feeling safe and not wanting to be in a line of fire or be targeted or be in the midst of all this chaos and conflict between your parents. So you avoided it. It worked really, really well. Except now, as an adult, when your partner wants to engage and needs to know that you've got their back, it doesn't work so well. It creates a lot of conflict. So maybe we need to kind of reframe. I wonder what it would be like if, it's that kind of stuff.
Laurie, I've read a lot of books on attachment, and by reading some of my posts lately that I'm fascinated by it. But the snapshot that you just gave, my mind is blown, and I'm so happy for my listeners right now, because you just summarized that so perfectly. That dance that people often do, and why you feel anxious in relationships, or why you feel like you're an avoidant in relationships. So I have a pretty big question. So again, circling back to my experience in the recovery environment, you hear the term codependency often, or emotional unavailability, or he or she's emotionally unavailable, and the codependent will always chase an emotionally unavailable person. What do you think about the term codependency? What does that mean for you?
There's a couple of things. I think codependency can be healthy. We think of codependency as something that shows up in addiction, but actually in a healthy, secure attachment, you've got a very healthy codependency, which is like, that Venn diagram. We have this part of our life that overlaps and another part of our life where there's room for us to be individuals. And I think in a healthy relationship, healthy codependency looks like, you've got my back. I know you're going to be there for me. I know we can stand shoulder to shoulder, even if we disagree. I know that we can do a rewind. and that we're not always going to be the best version of ourselves, but we will be there, and I will create a soft place for you to land. I think that's a form of healthy codependency. I think what happens in sort of the addiction world, as I know it, it sounds like it's negative, but listen, when you're living with someone who is actively involved in their addiction, the addiction becomes a third party in the relationship. It's like a lover, it's like a job, workaholic, but it becomes a third party in the relationship. So the partner who is watching their partner engaged in this addiction feels unimportant, unloved, I don't matter. The addiction will win out. So what do? They try to control it. It creates a tremendous amount of anxiety because you don't know how your partner's going to show up. You don't know what their availability will be. I mean, just from an emotional perspective, it sets up pursuit withdraw, because the person who's active in their addiction is going to move towards that. And what are they moving towards? I don't want to feel. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to be fully present. I can't. It's too painful. I don't know how. I don't even know what's going on with me. I can't name the emotions. It's like the question is, dude, where's your pain? Where is your pain? What is going on right now? I'm less interested in, did you drink today? I'm much more interested from an attachment point of view. Tell me where the pain is. Let's peel back the onion, because I really want to understand. Right? That's, I think, and I don't know, Jess, because I'm just thinking about folks with whom I've worked who have, and I don't have tons of addiction experience, but I look at it through an attachment lens. And then I see this dance, this infinity loop, right, that we talked about earlier, where the partner who's watching their loved one go through this feels so powerless. And so they count the number of beers their partner drank, or how long they were gone, or how they locked themselves into a room to watch porn. And this feeling of powerlessness and I don't matter and I'm not important and I can't compete with that, then drives many people into this false sense of being able to control. And I think that's where the sort of the codependent thing comes from, as opposed to really working with, to what's happening for the person with the addiction. What's the pain you can't sit with? I'm really curious about that.
I think this is going to be my first 6-hour podcast. I hope you have a lot of time this afternoon. I wish you were my therapist.
Sorry, Jess, I'm a big talker.
I'm just blown away right now. I'm so excited for my listeners. This is amazing, and thank you for saying that codependency can also be healthy. The smile on my face when you said that, I've never, ever heard anybody say that before. And it's so interesting. I just picked my best friend up. She's visiting, and we were in the car driving home, and she's got the most adorable husband. And I said, so how are things going? And she says, great. She says, he's so sweet. He's so awesome. We're really codependent right now. But the way that she said it, it was like this bubbly little warm. And I was like, I don't think that that's a bad thing. She's like, no, we're just so close right now. And I just thought, wow, how sweet is that? And then to hear you say codependency can be a healthy thing as well. I think there's just so much negative connotation that comes to the word codependency. So I'm happy that you shared that. Now, what would be, we don't have too much time left, but just quickly for listeners, what would be a reason that somebody, because I hear this a lot and I see this a lot, what would be a reason that somebody would stay with someone, especially for the amount of time that they do, who is in active addiction, who knows they should leave or this isn't healthy? What would be like some of the reasons that they would stay in that relationship?
Fear. I think fear probably comes up for some folks. What would my life be like without this person? What about financial security? I'm afraid of being alone. I don't know what life would be like. I think fear can be part of it. And I think people stay because they genuinely love the partner who's in their active addiction. And I don't know how, I mean, who am I to judge?
Yeah.
But I think too, it begs the question of what happens for you when, and perhaps also how the addiction plays out in the partner. I think there's a lot of variables, Jess, as to why someone stays or leaves.
Yeah.
I think for some people, it's like, nope, we've been through this so many times. I don't have the bandwidth anymore. I just don't have it in me. I am drained. I don't have a drop left in me to continue like this. And then some marriages, of course, they end because the addiction and the pain that this other person is feeling is I mean, it's a process over time. My God, it's hard work. In the work that you've done, it's not just, add water and stir. It happens over a period of time. But I think there's a lot of reasons why people stay, but I think love and fear actually are two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who would I be without this person? Because often the other person becomes part of the work, right? So it becomes their job, like depending on how high the anxiety and the fear is about their partner, that can be their attention can be a full-time job too. And they forget about like they lose themselves. They absolutely lose themselves.
Yeah.
So I think, that's tough work too. Why am I staying? What am I afraid of? What are the losses, the gains? And it requires some introspection, I think, and some work on that partner too.
And so gently put by you, I just want to touch on one last thing. I had posted something on Facebook last week, and I had used the term love addict. And that's a term that I've grown up with in the recovery environment. There's support groups that support that term. And you provided some feedback, which I'm eternally grateful for. And, reframing the word love addict to attachment injury.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important to reframe that way?
Well, pardon me. I guess, first of all, what do we mean by love addict? And I think when I commented on that, it was my understanding is that it's a pattern, right, that happens. So it could be things like social media, posting your profile on Tinder, and different applications, and like looking for the feedback, right? Did I get swiped? Did somebody interested in me? Like I've worked with clients who they're so focused on all of that. It's not about the relationship. It's about this feeling of, I feel better about myself when I get the attention. And so that to me is definitely an attachment injury. Something's happened somewhere where it becomes about the chase and not about the actual being in a healthy relationship, which means knowing it's connecting with yourself as opposed to looking externally for validation and feeling good. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
So when you maybe as a child had to work hard to feel loved, then in your adult relationships, it may be familiar for you to have to work for the love. And so you get drawn to partners who are not emotionally available, and you're always chasing and you're always disappointed, or something happens and you feel rejected. But I think it's about the pursuit of validation and feeling important and looking outside for that, as opposed to sitting and feeling all the feels about who I am as a person, and actually developing emotional intimacy with yourself. And that's where your relationship with yourself really needs to start evolving, because if you're looking elsewhere for validation and confirmation of who you are as a person, you'll be chasing your whole life. And a lot of people do.
I'm sure a lot of people do. So you mentioned, just in closing, you mentioned Sue Johnson, who is a great resource. Are there any other resources besides maybe the 2,000 followers I have calling you for therapy after this call?
You have 2,000 followers. I think we only have 5. Yeah, I do think Sue Johnson rocks. Her work just resonates so strongly with me. And I'm not there's always things to learn in that model. As a therapist, it's not an easy model because you've got multiple realities, and it's a complex model to learn, but it's just so exciting to use in the therapy room. I think there's lots of information out there on attachment.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage listeners just to Google attachment, and there will be Diane Poole Heller, who's no relation to me, has written a book called Attached, or The Importance of Attachment. Anyways, look up her stuff. It's really good also. There's lots of podcasts. There's a good podcast that I refer clients to called Foreplay Radio. We didn't even talk about sex, Jess. Sex and attachment. That's a whole other podcast, okay?
Oh, you're coming back, Laurie. You are coming back. That's already been decided.
But Foreplay Radio talks about sex and attachment. Very important. Good stuff. Really, really good stuff. I've taken a workshop with George Fowler, who's one of the 2 people doing that podcast. He's great. Yeah, so I think that's probably a good place to start, but Hold Me Tight is good.
Okay. And I almost forgot your podcast, which I have been listening to, Therapist Unplugged. Love it.
Yes. Well, you got a little bit of unplugged today.
That's what I'm looking for. Raw, unplugged, uncensored, unfiltered. Yeah. You can't put filters on people like us. No.
Absolutely not. No. Hey, listen, you know what? That's just who I am. Unapologetically, that's who I am. And I think that when we make these topics real, Jess, and relatable, it makes it easier for others to talk openly. You'll have to stay tuned to the next one because I'm interviewing 2 people and it's about life after 60.
I'm so excited.
A conversation with friends, with my 2 best friends who I've known for 1,000,000 years. So we're going to talk about marriage, sex, friendships, and whatever else comes up.
And that's on Therapist Unplugged
Therapist Unplugged. Yeah, we're recording it in 2 weeks. But I think that's going to be a fun one. So there's Therapist Unplugged. People can learn more about me at themontfortgroup.com. And there's lots of blogs there. I've written blogs on grief, my whole experience when my former husband died and my daughter was getting married like just months later. Aging, middle age is not a crisis. Middle age is actually a great place to be. I think I'm in the best place I have been in my whole life. And this is my 3rd act. So I want to offer up hope and joy for those of us in our 60s. It's a good place to be.
I love it. My mom said the same thing. Thriving.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Thriving. Exactly.
Yeah.
Jess, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having me and for asking such great questions.
The pleasure is all, I'm still mind blown. The pleasure was all mine. You were absolutely amazing. I'm so excited for everybody to listen to this. And if you're okay with it, I will have you back as many times as you can handle.
That would be my pleasure, Jess. Thank you so much.
Laurie, you have a great day, and thank you so much again.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.